Games are big, but I'm not sure that everybody in this room know how big it is. Until 2017, the game is going to reach the astonishing number of about $35 billion. Okay? And this accounts for about 34% out of the whole video games market. The main driver for the entire industry is mobile game and tablets. And free-to-play is dominating the market. How many guys here or girls develop free-to-play games or develop for mobile? Okay, so for those of you who don't know what free-to-play is, free-to-play games are games that are downloaded for free, and the entire monetization model is based on in-application purchases and based on advertising in the game. So free-to-play is about 90 to 98% of the market already, and if you want to be big in mobile gaming, and if you want to be big in the video game industry, you have to build your free-to-play strategy. It's really easy to understand how free-to-play works. Now, the entire revenue that you will make from your game accounts for the revenues that you make per user from the moment that he activated the application for the first time until he leaves the application for good. We call it LTV, or customer lifetime value. That's subtracted with the eCPI. eCPI is the effective cost per installation, which means how much marketing money do we spend to get one player to play your game. Okay? The first minus the second times the number of players gets a total amount of revenues for the title. Okay, this is pretty, I'm trying to not go too much into the details of the model, so it's a bit simplified, but I think that it gives a pretty good understanding on how it works. Okay, so the formula is pretty simple, but the challenge is also big. And it's big because the competition over the free time of the players right now is pretty fierce. And I think that the slide demonstrates it's better than anything. And as you can see, the number of apps that were uploaded only to the iTunes App Store since 2008 until today has grown substantially. And what you don't see in this slide is that every month there is more than 10,000 games that are being published to Google Play and to iTunes App Store combined. So the competition is pretty strong. And the result of that strong competition is the marketing costs that are skyrocketing. Okay? The CPI is getting higher and higher, and it's getting harder to market your application. And you have to take it into account when you build your mobile distribution strategy. Just to be clear, about a year ago, the CPI for a loyal user that actually played the game was about $2.50, and today it's over than $4. And I'm not talking about incentivized traffic or only downloads. I'm talking about users that are actually playing the game and have some chance of driving revenues up. So we get to see a lot of game developers from indies to medium-sized and to big guys in the industry. And one of the biggest mistake that we're seeing is not thinking about the commercial value of their game. A lot of the developers are creating really good games that are engaging, that are fun, but they have no chance of becoming a successful business. And I think the quote is that says it better than I can, but they're getting really good at building the wrong product. Okay, and the better they get, the wronger they are. And to improve this, we need a plan. Okay, so the next couple of slides will focus on some basic tenets that I think that every free-to-play game developer will have to think about before building their free-to-play strategy. By the way, that is not to say that the games that indies and small and many game developers are making are not good. They can be engaging, fun, and they can have pretty good visual graphics, but if it's not a sustainable business, the company will not be able to do it over time. Okay, commandment number 1, okay? You will choose your product positioning wisely. And this is probably the most complicated slide in the presentation, so I apologize in advance. But I think that it's worthwhile to look into it. So on the y-axis, you have the growth strategy. On the x-axis, you have LTV. Growth is directly related to CPI, and LTV is LTV. And going from the top left square and clockwise. The first type of game that we're seeing quite a lot in the industry are super casual games that have some unique visual appearance and that can target a pretty large addressable market. Okay, those are pretty simple and basic games. The LTV that they can actually produce is pretty low, but if they're lucky enough, they will get some organic traffic and be in the top of the charts. And I think that the most famous example for that is Flappy Birds, but also Crossy Road and a couple of other titles that made it pretty big. To be honest, this is not my favorite strategy because it depends mostly on luck. You just put your application on the store, do some initial PR and hope that it will pick up. If it's not, then you lose all the months or years you invested in the game. The upside of it is that the production costs are usually pretty low. So you can actually make a game in small teams and pretty quickly. The second type of game are the ones that have some non-paid growth strategy, okay? But they have higher LTV. Those games are a bit bigger in terms of production. And they usually use some kind of a brand or a strong IP to get those organic downloads. Good example for that is the Kardashians and Contest of Champions by Marvel. Those have been pretty strong on the top grossing charts in the last year or month, depending on which game you look at. The problem is that you have to pay a lot of money for brands which do not necessarily justify the money that you actually pay. So you might have been better off just investing in user acquisition. And if the brand is not committed to actually do some marketing for you, then you can find yourself in a lose-lose situation. And the third, is games that just have really strong free-to-play economy. Okay, you probably know those games pretty well. Clash of Clans, Game of War. Those are some big titles that have made substantial revenues. And although they do not benefit from non-paid growth, they're making enough revenues per user so they can have a very sustainable marketing strategy. Okay, and obviously, every studio can pick their own strategy. I have my opinion on the subject, but it also depends on the amount of money that it can allocate for the project, the amount of budget it can invest in optimizing the game and in launching your game, and if you can get access to any IP. Rule number 2, you will validate your business assumptions. Every developer has some basic assumptions that are taken. If they are done conscious or not, and eventually they will come into play, so it's better to think about everything in advance. For instance, are you making a game that is a niche, or can it target a really big addressable market? I met about 2 years ago a guy in a conference that made this really complex strategy game. It was highly complicated. It was developed by a team of 20 guys, and nobody in the world could ever play it. So because it was so complicated. So maybe those users would have generated some good revenues, but the scale of the project of the revenues could never get up. Okay, second question. There are many, by the way. I'll just review a couple of them. Do you have enough of differentiation to generate some organic growth? Let's say that you do go for the first very risky strategy. If you do that, at least make sure that you have some really unique gameplay, really unique graphic, so that it can get the attention of the App Store manager, the PR, the agencies, and everyone that can actually make your game stand out from all the other games out there in the market. Do you have enough resources to market your game? Do you have the right partner to do it for you if you don't? That's another question. Do we collaborate with a publisher or do we go for self-publishing? And keep in mind that there are some hidden costs behind developing a game. It's not only marketing, it's not only development, it's also the optimization part. Because once you have the game ready, it's not actually ready. You have to soft launch it, you have to work on it, and I will discuss it later in the presentation. 3, you will not overestimate chart positioning. And this is extremely important because most often I see developers that are saying, okay, I'm going to invest this amount of money in marketing my game to begin with. I'm going to be located in the top 20 games in those countries, and that will be enough to make my game a big hit. And it's usually not the case. First of all, because getting to those places is getting harder and harder. there's more and more competition, and the chances of you to get to the top 50 is pretty low, at least in the most prominent countries. And even if you do, the likelihood for you to stay in those positions for a long time is also pretty low unless you are able to sustain, to reinvest your revenues in the campaign. And no, featuring is not a strategy. I know that it's tempting to talk with the App Store manager and get their attention, and they can, there is some chance that you'll get your game featured, but you're dependent on the internal changes of the ecosystems, which is pretty unstable. It's enough for one person to move to another position and you find yourself without your point of contact. And even if you do get your game featured, then there are different types of featuring and different type of volumes that you can expect, and you also only see that after the fact. And it's really hard to get your game featured over and over again. So it's mostly a one-hit attempt. Okay, designing for profit. This is a pretty elaborate subject by itself, so I can't actually discuss all the details in one short slide, but the idea is that you cannot take a game that was already designed and just enforce a monetization system on top of it. It doesn't actually work, because monetization is something that has to be built as an integral part of the game mechanics. You have the core loop, but you have the monetization loop. And the fact that builder and strategy game are so successful is because spending and resources are actually at the very core of the game. So the user is accustomed to pay but virtual currency, and eventually this will translate into actual money. And when you design your game, you should also look at the constants. LTV, okay, another equation. I'm not really into math, but I think it's pretty simple to understand. LTV is the addition of the in-app LTV and the ads LTV. And in in-app, you have two factors. You have the conversion, which is how much out of the users that are playing the game will convert into paying users, okay? And our PPU, the average revenues per paying users. There are constants in this industry, okay, that nobody is able to exceed. If you're extremely good in converting people into paying, you'll be around 3%. That's Game of War KPIs, okay? That's amazing. Keep in mind that you have to have pretty high LTV, so you have to build your system so that your paying users will pay over and over again. If you just have one product that you're selling, we remove ads. I know that it sounds pretty straightforward, but there are developers that are still doing that. If you have just one product and 3% of the users are paying for it, that will result in very few cents into your LTV. And I will actually extend this, not only design for profit, but also design for distribution. Make sure that your game encourages players to make invitation and requests to other players in the game. Multiplayer games are now actually entering the top of the charts. It's a new trend, but it's actually quite powerful. And not only that, it increases the LTV, but it actually reduces the CPI because you can rely more on non-paid growth. You would use retention system. Retention systems are usually the notification messages that you see on your mobile device. The best way to implement it is to have it as an integral part of your game. For instance, you have a daily bonus and you're about to miss it, or you have something that happened in the game, like a person that attacked your base. Okay, those are all very powerful messages that usually drive the users back, even if they're already churned away from the game. This is quite powerful, but even the most basic implementation, just telling them, oh, we miss you, you have new stuff waiting for you in the game, which is pretty generic, actually results in an increase from 10 to 15 in day 7 retention. Okay, and that is pretty easy to implement, and it's surely worth the while. Retention system is not something that you have to develop yourself. There are a lot of systems that are available with various sizes of packages. You can actually access it pretty easily on the net. So the production costs are also pretty low. You will measure your LTV accurately. Okay, so we said that LTV is important because LTV times the number of players actually determines the revenues. That's okay. But it's also one key component that your marketeer will use to buy users, to acquire users, because you don't want to spend more money per user than the amount of money that you make per user. Okay? Otherwise, you lose money. That's the equation that we saw in the second slide. Now, it's not that easy to calculate it because it's not just taking the revenues and dividing it by the amount of users. Okay? This is our pool. This is the monthly revenues. LTV is actually a more complicated function of retention, monetization, and social value. Different games use different models in order to calculate it, although you can find some generic ones. And there are a couple of softwares that you can use in order to use this strategy. The big guys, not only do they calculate LTV in a way that is very accurate, they also do prediction modeling. Why? Because LTV changes all the time. It changes because of seasonal effects. It changes because you change your game. And as you change your game, the entire user experience changes, and you're most likely to see it go up and down depending on whether you're doing a good job or not. So if you just wait until all your users are leaving the game, especially if it's a big game where you have good retention, then you'll probably see that you wait too much time until you can actually translate those insights into marketing actions. So prediction is pretty important. And last but not least, there's segmentation. Okay, today, there are so many marketing platforms that allow targeting. But targeting is only useful if you can measure your LTV and use that as a part of the targeting strategy. For instance, if you take into account countries, demographic attributes, device tiers, not only the specific devices, but the price of the devices, the technical specification of the devices, and of course the marketing channel, this has some pretty substantial effect on what will be the LTV. So measuring the LTV in a way that is segmented allows you to take those insights and use them for marketing as well. And for marketing, you will also measure your eCPI, and this is not eCPI. This is not as complicated as LTV because it's easier to calculate. But the eCPI stands for effective cost per installation. Let's say that I'm purchasing 1,000 users, okay? But the result, I get 500 more. Then my eCPI is actually lower. Okay, this is one formula that can be used. It's pretty straightforward. And as for LTV, segmentation also should be used. Now, eCPI should be generally lower than LTV. Okay, this is the green smiley on the screen. If it's lower, then you hit the holy grail. You can have your game marketed in a way that is very scalable and efficient. If it's not, then you don't have a business yet. You still have to optimize. You will do A/B testing. Now, A/B testing, everybody says that they're doing A/B testing, but not everybody actually does that. So, because the problem with A/B testing is that there are so many variations and variables that you have to test, and multivariant testing is pretty complicated. A/B testing is really strong when you can actually isolate the exact change that you did in the game, and for that change, you have a control group and you have an alternative. That's the way to do it, and you have to make sure that the data is significant. You don't have to do all the math behind it yourself. There are also some platforms that are available. Amazon is providing an A/B testing platform. Google is providing as well, and I think that many others are doing that at the same level. Another point about it is that when you do A/B testing, it's also important what is the KPI that you're actually measuring. Let's say that I'm changing my ad display strategy, showing less or more ads. This is a pretty simple use case. Do I measure intention because I want to keep people more in the game? Do I measure daily revenues? And usually those factors are coming one against the other. So I can increase retention and have some decrease to my daily revenues. That's something that doesn't tell you anything if you measure it that way. So I would suggest that you focus on the high-level KPIs. Focus on LTV, focus on eCPI. See that the change that you made in the game actually affected the one measurement that you try to improve. Number 9, you will do soft launch. Okay, you will soft launch your games. Again, something that is very common in the industry, but still missed by many. And the idea of soft launch is to take your game and market it to the smallest amount of group that can actually get you enough meaningful insights to improve the game. It's not only about making sure that the game works on the functional level, that technically it works on many devices. This is not the goal of soft launch. Soft launch is a commercial process. You want to measure your KPIs, LTV, eCPI, etc. This is just an example of some improvement that we made during 3 cycles of casual titles. This is global LTV. And obviously, we continue improving the LTV all the time. But you can see that even through a simple process of 3 iteration, okay, while the iteration number 3 was actually the last measurement, you see an amazing improvement. And when you multiply that by the number of users that will eventually play the game, you can see how it will contribute to your business. And number 10, if you do soft launch, and I hope that you do, don't scale up before you finish optimizing the game. This is, again, another common mistake. There's a lot of pressure for going live. There are shareholders, there's the board, investors, etc., and you want to show value pretty quickly. The only problem is that if you decide to scale up before you're ready, then you will probably kill the game. And the damage to the company will be much higher. So that process of optimizing the monetization system, user distribution, everything as a part of the soft launch is something that should be done carefully, and you should be diligent enough and responsible enough to still hold on the brakes before you go live. So those are the 10 guidelines that we try to keep when we work on our projects. Now, a few words about game optimization. Unfortunately, as some of you probably know, game optimization is something that is difficult. It's difficult because it takes a lot of time. You have to aggregate data from multiple data sources. You have to aggregate data from the app stores, from the ad networks, from the mobile application, from server-side applications. And you have to analyze the data, and you probably have some huge amount of data sets. You need the hardware and the logic infrastructure to do that. You need to build the models to improve the game. You need to build the models to calculate and predict the KPIs. It's pretty complex. And you also need some benchmarks, because every time you take a decision, you want to see how you're competing with the industry. Okay, this is something that is pretty clear to people that actually went through the process. So, luckily for all the game developers in the world, at Playscape we started a new initiative. We call it Alpha Game. And we took a lot of the infrastructure that we built and worked on for years, and we make it accessible for developers from small to medium size, so that they can actually use it and improve the game. It's currently in closed beta, but if you're interested, we probably open the platform during Q2 of 2016. You can register here and perhaps win a cool drone. And that's it for the presentation. And if you have any answers, I'm here to answer. Okay. Thank you.
У кого есть вопрос? Да. Hi. I have a question about the soft launch. So you said that it should be done first. And how do you choose the country for soft launch? If I understand right, you have to choose one country, you launch there, maybe you choose another one, you launch there, and then you decide to launch worldwide, right?
Basically, but it's more like, okay, I can, do you want me to elaborate or?
Yeah.
Okay, so I wouldn't go for the country that you aim to have your mass distribution from the first place, because you have some when you distribute through the app stores, you have some advantage if your application is new. You get into the top new charts really quickly, and that actually helps you to get your game, exposed to many users. What we usually do is that we select one country that is similar in terms of culture and language to the main country that we plan to launch in. So if we plan to launch in the States, we go for Canada. usually, but you can also go for Australia and sometimes the UK, although it's not as good as Canada in my opinion. It's not similar enough. And then I would suggest starting with the smallest amount of users possible. Try to build your funnels in a way that you understand how many users you want to have in each phase of the funnel, and then take it backward and understand how many people you have to bring. Usually what we do is that we start with a really small group of about 2,000 people to 3,000 people just to measure the basic retention numbers and some conversion, and then we go with 10,000 users to be sure that we can measure some more advanced KPIs. And as you see that it grows up, you want to measure some scalability, because the fact that you can show some KPIs on 10,000 users doesn't mean that you can show the same for millions. So we try to scale up the traffic, build some kind of a model for scaling up. And if it works well, then we duplicate it to other countries. Keep in mind that you'll have to do some fine-tuning, both for the LTV calculation and for this ECPI, and marketing can vary between different countries.
Еще вопросы, пожалуйста? Все?
No questions? Thank you. And then enjoy the rest of the conference.